Great. All right. Thank you, guys. All right. So let's get started. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 2025 Annual Planning Group Training. I am Marlon Pangilinan, Program Coordinator with the City Planning Department. Thank you all for being here. This is a mandatory formal training that provides an overview of Council Policy 600-24, which lays out the roles, responsibilities, and standard operating procedures for recognized planning groups, along with information on city planning and decision-making processes. Per Council Policy 600-24, Terms and Conditions, Section 7.4, planning group voting members are required to complete the training each year within 60 days of being initially elected or appointed to the community planning group, and by no later than June 1st of each succeeding year, for as long as voting members are serving or re-elected. This training is required for planning group members to be eligible to serve on their respective planning groups and for legal indemnification, or in other words, legal protection by the city. Our training is being conducted in the Zoom webinar format, so you will not have to worry about whether to mute or unmute or show your video. Just simply log in your question, as everybody will have an opportunity during the course of the training to for Q&A, and for all attendees to submit their questions during the course of the training by using the Q&A function, as you can see it on the screen, on your menu bar. It should show up on your version of Zoom, similar to this image here, with a question mark and the letters Q and A on it. Okay, the training is being recorded along with everyone in attendance. So please disable any artificial intelligence assistance. To get credit for the training, you will need to attend for the whole duration. A copy of the recording will be made available. I'm sorry, to be made available for everyone to view after the training. That way, it will be posted on the Community Planning Group Resources webpage for reference and be used for alternative compliance for those who were not able to make tonight's training. We will provide more details and instructions for completing the makeup training when the recording is posted. Also, if you can have your smartphones nearby, we're going to be using them in a few interactive activities to test your knowledge along the way. Here is our agenda tonight. I have already covered the introduction along with some details on tonight's format. So next, we'll have some opening remarks by our Deputy Director of the Community Planning and Housing Division of the City Planning Department, Tate Galloway. We will then get into an overview of the City Planning Department work program, an overview of council policy, the development review process, and what planning groups should know about the California Environmental Quality Act, also known as CEQA. We will have a few online interactive activities, a break halfway through our training, and again, opportunities for Q&A throughout the training. We expect to end by 7 p.m. tonight. Right now, I would like to introduce Tate Galloway, Deputy Director of the City Planning Department's Community Planning and Housing Division, who would like to welcome you all with some opening remarks.
All right, great. Well, thank you, Marlon, and good evening, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank everybody for taking time out of your busy schedules to spend some hours with us tonight. I'd also like to congratulate those of you who are joining us as newly elected Community Planning Group members, and then to say thank you to all of you for your service and your roles on each of your community planning groups. As many of you know, the City Planning Department is responsible for planning an equitable and sustainable future with affordable homes, good jobs, infrastructure, and public spaces for all San Diegans. Our vision is to be forward-thinking leaders who work together with the people with all of our communities to find and implement solutions to improve the lives of everybody that lives within our city. Each of you have your planning group role as part of this effort. And on all the work that we do, we rely upon each of you to shape what future San Diego looks like. The city and our communities are improved when we have as much participation as possible from the community, ensuring that participation is representative of the demographics of our communities and city. Although We wish we could hear from you, from every single person that lives across the city in each of your communities. Because of this, because we cannot always do this, we do rely upon community planning groups and other community-based organizations to help us make those connections as part of the community planning process. So thank you for all your efforts. And I know that a lot of the groups really work hard over the past 2 years to ensure representation and input that reflects the demographics of the people that live within each of your communities. And then also, we really just want to thank you for your time, which is the thing that is hard to come by. And we really appreciate it, especially for coming tonight and on the monthly meetings that you have been doing and you will be doing in the future. Before I turn it back to Marlon to continue tonight's training, I did want to thank the department's community planners that are joining us here today, as well as Marlon, and to also let you know that we have an amazing team of community planners that's available to assist the community planning groups. So if you don't yet know who your assigned community planner is, we'll make sure tonight to answer any questions you have and provide you with that information, as well as showing you how to get that information. So again, if you have any questions regarding your service to a planning group, please feel free to reach out to our team so that we can assist you. And with that, I turn it back over to Marlon to lead through tonight's training. And thank you again.
Great. Okay, thank you, Tate. That concludes our opening remarks. So now I would like to introduce our staff presenters for our training tonight. In addition to myself, we have Morgan Ruby, Senior Planner, and Angela Dang, Assistant Planner from the City Planning Department. They will be providing an overview of Council Policy 600-24. Providing an overview on the development review process is Francisco Pancho Mendoza, Development Project Manager from the Development Services Department. Now that you know who we are, let's find out what communities are being represented tonight by jumping into an interactive Wordle activity. Wordle allows us to gather and share one-word responses that will be shown on the screen in random directions, with the most popular responses showing as the largest word on the screen. So now, if your community has 2 or more words in it, like say Torrey Pines or Carmel Mountain Ranch, Sabre Springs, just combine the words with no spaces so that it all can show up in one instance. So if you just go ahead and take a look at the screen for the instructions, this is how we're going to participate. So for our next step, everyone, please grab your smartphones and scan the QR code on the screen, or you can also open up a separate web browser and enter in the URL field, https://sandiego.cnf.io/. And then you should show up on, what should show up on your screen is the City of San Diego logo at the top, and below it should say 2025 Annual Planning Group Training, Learning Objectives, and a statement that says polls will automatically appear here when open for responses. So let's take a moment to all get there. And just to let you know, this isn't a mandatory requirement of the training. So if you're just going to watch and just see what happens, that's fine. You'll still get training credit for this evening. Okay, so let's move on. All right, so this is, I think right now, if you all look at your phones, you should see the prompt that says, what community are you from? So go ahead and type in your community, and we should see that on the screen. Oops. Okay, great. Sorry for those little technical glitches there. Wow, okay, so we have, it's looking like Linda Vista, a lot of people coming from there, a lot of representation pretty much across the city, depending on how large the words are coming in. All right. Cool. All right. Well, it's good to see all of you here. Thanks for coming. Okay, we're going to try another one. The question is, how many years have you been on a planning group? So if you could look at your smartphone and add or respond to any of the selections there. So, ooh, it looks like we've got a lot of new folks here. Large percentage here. We got 41%. Some people with 2 to 5 years of experience. It's great. And what's interesting is the 20+ years folks. So we got 2% of those guys representing tonight. That's great. Thank you for your service. All right, great. Okay, so let's move on. I want to begin this training by informing everyone of the City Planning Department's role in achieving Mayor Todd Gloria's strategic plan. This plan includes the following goals: creating homes for all of us, protecting and enriching every neighborhood, advancing mobility and infrastructure, championing sustainability, and fostering regional prosperity. We do this by focusing and promoting our work in the following areas: homes and jobs, equity, the environment, and parks and public spaces. We work in conjunction with other departments such as sustainability. Well, actually, sustainability and mobility are now part of our department. And we also work with the Economic Development Department. We also work closely with the city's Development Services Department, which oversees the review and permitting of development projects. With everything we do, our department work program is focused on achieving a balance of the following 6 desired outcomes related to our strategic goals: providing for new homes, delivering infrastructure and fostering good jobs, strengthening our climate resiliency and conservation efforts, planning with equity as a focus both in informing our initial efforts and initiatives and final outcomes. The several slides will showcase the number of initiatives that we are currently working on and have recently finished that meet these outcomes. Providing more homes and promoting jobs is done through our community plan updates, annual updates to the Land Development Code, and initiatives shown here were related to the housing element. And through our housing element of the city's general plan, which serves as the city's housing plan, it provides a framework for how the city will address the state's identified demand for the city to provide opportunities to produce 108,000 homes between 2021 and 2029 at various levels of affordability. Given the increasing concerns of climate warming, we prepared Climate Resilience SD to provide strategies to prepare, respond, and recover from potential climate change hazards like extreme heat, wildfires, sea level rise, and flooding and drought, as well as how the proposed investments can improve local communities. The city adopted Climate Action 2022, which established a community-wide goal of net zero by 2035, committing San Diego to an accelerated trajectory for greenhouse gas reductions. To help achieve greenhouse gas reductions, our planning efforts focus on creating opportunities for development near transit, as well as equitably expanding our infrastructure for walking and bicycling. Regarding parks, we prepared a parks master plan to make the city's park system more modernized, equitable, and accessible for all residents by moving from a suburban planning approach to an approach that relates to urban development, which the City Council adopted back in 2021. With the goal of increasing equitable access to public parks and open space, the Planning Department, in collaboration with the Parks and Recreation Department, will develop also a citywide trails master plan and a park needs index, as well as the Choice Creek Regional Park Master Plan. With regard to creating public spaces, historically inequitable planning policies and the lack of equitable funding tools have resulted in significant disparities in funding for parks, libraries, public streets, and other public spaces. To address this, the city adopted Build Better SD in 2022 as a citywide initiative to enable the faster delivery of public spaces and facilities equitably and sustainably across San Diego. The city is currently working on developing an inclusive public engagement guide to ensure inclusive public engagement and community participation for city initiatives, plans, projects, particularly in communities that have historically experienced barriers to public participation. Participation that is truly representative of the communities is critical to ensuring that we are making decisions in ways that will improve everyone's quality of life. Our work on public engagement also includes planning group support to the 41 planning groups that were officially recognized last year. This support includes annual training and assistance with planning group operational questions provided through your assigned community planner. Future opportunities will include trainings for chairs and public outreach and engagement. Another integral aspect of the City Planning Department's work program is a focus on equity and inclusion. So what does equity and inclusion mean? Equity is what occurs when we eliminate institutional racism and systemic disparities, providing everyone with equitable access to opportunity and resources to thrive, no matter where they live or how they identify. What we mean by inclusion is the action or state of including or being included with a group or structure. More than simply diversity and numerical representation, inclusion involves authentic and empowered participation and true sense of belonging. Through equity and inclusion, we create opportunities for all San Diegans to participate in the plans and policies that shape our city. We create these opportunities through our Equity Forward program, which is a comprehensive approach to creating a more equitable, healthy, and enjoyable place for all San Diegans. This involves prioritizing investments where we need it the most and planning for all. This means in areas that are underserved, where efficiency will result in the greatest number of San Diegans who would be served and where most growth is occurring. The evolving policies, plans, and processes under Equity Forward will create more equitable opportunities and investments in San Diego. By acknowledging the effects of policy decisions that have resulted in inequitable outcomes, Equity Forward will leverage the diversity of voices in our city to benefit all San Diegans. We want to hear from diverse voices and perspectives. Often the same solutions and same way of thinking is not often the best choice to best serve San Diegans. This way of group thinking could prevent resources from the communities that need it most or to those who would truly benefit from it. So we strive to hear from all perspectives for input to be meaningful, because communities are made up of all kinds of people and we need to serve all of them. When we hear from diverse voices and perspectives, we learn from others and understand everyone's perspective, which builds awareness between and among stakeholders and decision makers. Overall, this greater understanding has the potential for leading to new ideas, innovative solutions, so we can serve everyone. All these diverse voices and perspectives are gathered from many sources, like public hearings where decision makers hear directly from citizens and stakeholders, and community-based organizations that represent and advocate for community needs. Planning groups are one of several channels that are integral for obtaining and providing input from the community. Planning groups are not the only venue for the public to provide input and engage with the city. Other stakeholders like community-based organizations, business improvement districts, or maintenance assessment districts have community interests and feedback to provide. Community input can also come from activities such as in-person events, online forums, surveys, and public hearings. As I mentioned, the City Planning Department is addressing equity and inclusion as part of its Equity Forward program. This includes several initiatives, including the development of regulations, policies under the environmental justice element, the prioritization of parks and open space for areas of the greatest need, ensuring inclusive public engagement and community participation through the creation of an inclusive public engagement guide, and creating partnerships with community-based organizations and other private entities to identify opportunities for greater efficiencies, coordination, and cooperation to encourage community investment. By acknowledging the effects of policy decisions that have resulted in equitable outcomes, Equity Forward will leverage the diversity of voices in our city to benefit all San Diegans. So how do we relate this to planning groups? Planning groups play a role in promoting equity and inclusion as well, by serving as a vehicle to represent a variety of interests and perspectives from each community. In council policy, there is an emphasis on diversity and inclusiveness, which translates to proactive efforts by the planning group. Each community planning group must gather certain demographic data of existing and new community planning group voting members and the community at large at the time of elections or other regular periods to ensure inclusion and diversity on the planning group. The community planning group shall compare this data with demographics of the community at large, as may be available from the city or other agencies such as Sandag's open data portal, and submit to the city as part of its annual report. Another component for planning groups is the community participation and representation plan, which was included with all applications for recognition last year by all 41 planning groups. This essentially spells out all the planning groups' goals for representing the diversity in their community, as well as what their plans are for conducting outreach, informing the community, and their efforts to involve the community at their meetings and maintain diversity on their planning group. Training. The city intends to roll out training opportunities for planning group members and chairs in the next year to help provide you with resources to implement inclusive public engagement. Okay, I will pause right there. Does anyone have any questions regarding our work program and how we are doing this through equity inclusion? So what I'm going to do right now is take a pause and go to our Q&A list here that has been slowly forming through my peripheral vision. I've been seeing everything pop up here. So let's kind of go through the Q&A and kind of address kind of what's been submitted. Okay, so Jennifer Cochran Schultz, I think I answered this question. We are recording this training, and we will also have an accounting of the folks attending tonight, so everyone will get credit. Doreen Diaz-Pesta, hi Doreen. What page and section 600-24 describes ad hoc committees? I don't see it in any sections. Okay, we could get back to you on that one and show you that section if Angela, or actually maybe Morgan, can look that up and maybe respond to that in the Q&A. That would be great. If not, I could find that section for you at a later time. But for ad hoc committees, as opposed to standing committees or subcommittees, those are committees that meet for a limited amount of time. Sometimes election committees are considered that. Or like a bylaws, amendment committee is also considered an ad hoc committee. It all depends on how the planning group identifies that. And per ad hoc committee, since they meet during a limited time, they're not subject to the Brown Act. So those meetings could be, virtual, so long as the majority of the members on that group are planning group members. So you can also have members from the community at large. At those communities, but we'll provide more information on that one. Matthew Wang, hey Matthew, do we need to sign in somewhere? No, we got you listed here. So you're in the Q&A, we've got you recorded. Looks like Doreen's got another question. 624 needs to be updated to include a contents and or index page. We can consider that. The update to the council policy was done actually recently back in 2024 with planning group recognition. But we can definitely note that for any changes, but that's a good idea to have a quick index to find sections in council policy. Let's see here. There's more generating. Okay, let's see here. Liz Schopes, hey Liz from Torrey Vine. Since the webinar wasn't available until today, shouldn't the date that the people are required to take it be extended? If you're referring to the June 1st deadline, so that is a deadline for all the members to take the training. However, there have been instances in the past where members have taken it over that deadline. However, if that happens, we always want planning group members to take the training as soon as possible to keep current on council policy. Also, that's important for indemnification. Now, things might not happen right away, it might happen down the line. So it does give an opportunity for planning group members to take the training later, given any personal circumstances. But we aren't planning to change the date. That would require an amendment to the council policy. And so we're going to leave that in there, but still have the alternative training for others to take and meet the obligation for the training requirement. Adam Gavanthor. Are subcommittee non-planning board members required to take training? Does indemnification extend to them? And if so, where is this formally described? Yes, the answer, that's a good question. Indemnification does extend to subcommittee members or individuals who are not elected voting planning group members. And that's identified in ordinance, I want to say 18333, if I got the number right. Basically, it's the indemnification ordinance. You can find that on our community planning group resources webpage. And that basically spells out the conditions for indemnification of planning group members in the case that there is any legal action against the planning group. And some of the main things are that for a subcommittee member, they are recognized as doing the work of the community as part of a planning group. So yes, they are identified in that role, but one of the main conditions are that they do take the training and then they operate under the council policy and their operating procedures as well as the Brown Act. And that, what happened in terms of any potential litigation didn't happen out of compliance. So long as they're meeting all those conditions, they would be indemnified under the ordinance. Nam Nguyen, let's see, oops, my thing just moved. Let's see here. A lot of questions from everybody this year. This is great. Nam, okay, oh, so you just put the URL in there. Mary Soriano, I'm on the La Jolla Planning Group and Subcommittee Traffic or the TNT group. Does this training count for both? Yes. So it's for all planning group members and any subcommittee members that take the training, they would get credit. And again, I referenced the indemnification ordinance and the conditions that need to be met in order for any indemnification to occur there. I think it says 2024. I'm not sure what that's being referred to. Oh, so the 2025 annual planning group training is not shown. I think Nam might be referring to the alternative training, which is not online yet. We usually post that after this virtual training to give an opportunity for people to, we encourage people to take this training first, and then we'll put that up very shortly. It most likely will consist of, watching this recording and also filling out a questionnaire and then submitting that to the city to get credit for the training. Okay, I'm going to bounce around here. Some people are just checking in. Okay, there's a question about how do ADUs fit in your efforts. So I know that's a kind of charged issue right now. I want to focus on the council policy and the operation. So issues on controversial projects, we can kind of address that online. So we could follow up with you separately on that, Robert Earth. Let's see here. What about San Diego River planning? So San Diego River planning, that would most likely be incorporated into the Mission Valley Community Plan and the update that was done there back in, I think, 2019. There's a lot of policies and recommendations there regarding policies on improving the San Diego River. And I think it incorporates some of the initial plans for that area as well. Okay, Doreen's got a lot of questions here. Doreen, I'm going to let everybody else have an opportunity to ask their questions and get those answered. But again, the questions here are being recorded. And so if we don't get to your questions, we will follow up with those as well. Let me just check the time here. We're at 5:33. Okay, I think we probably got through that part a little early, 5:33. Okay, cool. We still got a lot of time. Okay. Let's see here. Kyle Walker, considering that people who are happy with status quo or proposals tend not to show up and provide comments at all public meetings, tend to instead be opposed to something. How can we ensure that our planning group, community planning groups, actually capture the representative consensus of our communities and not just the vocal opposition? Okay, well, one of the things that we come to understand with public engagement is to go to where the people are. So it's one thing to have an open meeting, get an agenda out and say, hey, come to our meeting, without realizing that there might be barriers to other people who might have something interesting to say or contribute to your discussion. So you may want to consider more external outreach into some of these areas. There might be communities that might be very tight knit, that might usually tend to be with themselves. It might be a good idea to come over to any of their meetings and say, hey, I'm from the community planning group. This is what we do. We'd like to hear from you. And please join our meeting. We're hosting it here and there. And there might be other opportunities to participate and hear from you. So you might want to consider that. You could always check out other ways to do outreach because there's always like online outreach. Some people might be busy, might have, they might be really busy with their families, have transportation issues, or just basically don't have the time to come out to meetings. Maybe you may want to look into holding virtual meetings every now and then so that people can attend remotely. So that's another opportunity to kind of get more people involved and to kind of share your message. Kim Hansen, does this include town council input? Yes, town councils are another organization at the neighborhood level, or maybe even the community level, that gather input. They're also looking for the betterment of the community. So yes, hearing from them is also important as far as the overall city decision-making process is concerned. We also encourage collaboration between the planning group and any other neighborhood or community-based organizations as well. Mark Van Milligan, my question is, why are we trying to do diversity, equity, and inclusion when it was supposed to be abolished nationally? I knew this question was coming up. So yes, those are things going on at the federal level, but despite that, the very basis and nature of community planning groups is to hear from the community and that community, from that community, and be representative of the voices in the community. So whether there are policies against doing DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, the whole bottom line of community planning groups is to bring forward the voice of the community, and that's hearing from all your diverse neighbors and stakeholders. So that's why it's important. And that's also important in the decisions that the city makes, because we are trying to get the goods and services out to the people that need it most, and getting it out in the most efficient way possible. So basically, that's kind of what we're, yeah, the federal government's something else. Let's see, if DEI in San Diego gets canceled, will we take this to court? I don't know. I don't I don't represent the city in that fashion. We may want to check in with maybe some of the council members and maybe the mayor about that. But for as far as I know, I haven't heard of any threats to the way we do things in the city of San Diego. Kyle's got another question. Can you define the scope for community outreach? What does that mean? Is that just for purposes of bringing the community to the meetings or ensuring diversity on the board? Or is it that inclusive of the community plan group participation in community events to promote the community and community plan? Oh, Kyle, I think you pretty much covered it all. It's just a term for going out actively, proactively, like I said, going out to where the people are and hearing from them. And not just like just having open arms in a meeting that's open to the public and say, hey, come to our meeting. There's a proactive component to that. And then it could be done in various ways. It could be done in person. It could be done digitally on the web. It could be having your web page with all the information available for people to access. So when I mean public outreach, it's a very general term. And it's defined in many ways. And basically what you're trying to do is to get to hear from the most people, and from the most varied backgrounds, whether it's in your community, in an organization, whether it's at your job or whatever. So that's kind of essentially what that is. Can planning groups hold notice emergency meetings? Yes, they can. I believe they can do that within 24 hours. There's some certain conditions in council policy that allow you to do that. I don't know it offhand, but we can certainly forward that information and share that with the group. Got a question from Stu. One of the roles of the planning department in your presentation has to do with equity access to parks. The city's proposing to close Lake Miramar on Mondays and through Fridays. So it keeps moving here. I have taken an informal poll of users of the park on 3 weekdays, and have found people using the park from at least 50 neighborhoods in San Diego, including City Heights and other further distant areas. How is providing diverse access to park? How is this providing? Well, obviously that's a closure, and I would say that's a kind of a budget issue, which I do not want to get into as part of this training. So we'll probably have to follow up with the mayor or the council members on that, or attend any of the budget hearings that are, I believe, coming up in June. Okay, if from Annie Kafka, lots of questions keep coming in. If I have someone who is going to be voted in next month, will I give them this recording? Yes. So like I mentioned, we will have an online alternative training for any individuals who are unable to attend this meeting, or as a planning group member gets voted in, say like there was a vacancy like 3 months from now, and you guys filled it with a new member, that new member could complete the training online on their own time and submit the questionnaire, watch this video, and get credit for the training. So yeah, that's why we kind of provide that opportunity, because there may be people who may leave the planning group for their own reasons, And of course, the planning group wants to elect new people, and so those new people would be able to take the training on their own time and have access to it from the web. Denise Lopez, what? Ooh, hold on, bounced around here. I hope I found your Denise Lopez. Oh, what resources such as money would be provided to community planning groups for outreach? Okay, well, so every year, every fiscal year, the planning group is provided $500 as a stipend for any of your operations. And it could apply to anything that promotes the planning group. Could be like copying, printing, could be equipment, like a laptop or a projector. It could be paying for a like a Zoom license or maintaining a web page. So we do provide some monetary support for planning groups. Let's see here. Chris Roseman. Hey, Chris. How do planning groups collect demographic info from members who are elected to provide identification due to privacy concerns? Also, where can planning groups find demographic information to include in the annual report to compare the demographics of the board? Great question. This came up during the whole recognition process last year. A lot of folks were very hesitant to provide demographic data as part of the recognition process and identifying kind of the demographic makeup of their group. And so the way we handled that is we did this anonymously. Actually, the CPC came up with this idea, which is very old school fashioned way of doing it. And it got the job done. Essentially, we would have forms for providing age, race and ethnicity, household income. I think there was some representation, like how does an individual represent within the community? And so all the individuals on the planning group, the elected members, would fill out all those forms individually. Don't put your name on it, and then submit those to, say, like the chair or anyone who's designated to collect that information. So this wouldn't be done electronically, because electronically you could trace who sent the email, right? So this would be done very in like an analog way, with sheets of paper, the forms, and we have those on the website. Provide that to the chair or the designated person, and they would aggregate that information for the total of the group. So you would have that information in terms of total group members being of this, classification or category with no names attached to it. So completely anonymous. A lot of the 41 groups that were recognized last year did this. It was kind of a little bit of a learning curve and something for us to kind of really talk about until everyone got very comfortable with it. And so that's so far the best way right now, very analog, old-fashioned way of getting that information. And then your other question in regards to where do we find this demographic information, like census data and whatnot, I mentioned in my presentation, you can obtain this information for free via SANDAG's website, so San Diego sandag.org. And they have this open data portal, which has all this information, census data, forecasts, estimates, and they do it by what they call CPA, which is community planning area. And so you could go in there, pick kind of the data you want, like current data or the last census or the most recent estimate, and then pick the CPA. And there's a whole list from, Barrio Logan all the way to San Pasqual, Lake Hodges or whatever. And it has all that data in a PDF, and you could download that for free. And so you could use that as a comparison. Okay. Let's see here. I'm gonna go through a couple. Let's look at our time, 5:44. Okay. Actually, I think we might be over time. I'm sorry. I think we should start the rest of the council policy, but I really wanted to take an opportunity to answer a lot of these questions that keep coming in. So, Angela, let's go ahead and get you started on talking about council policy 600-24.
The governing documents shown here relate to the planning group's operations. Please refer to these documents when questions come up regarding roles and responsibilities for members, Brown Act questions, operating procedures, indemnification, and Robert's rules. These initiatives have all had public input and participation. The city is fortunate to have dedicated community members that serve our city through their involvement in the planning projects and initiatives. Tonight's training purpose is to go over the roles and responsibilities of planning groups as they serve in their advisory capacity. Council Policy 600-24 outlines the standard operating procedures and responsibilities of recognized planning groups. The Brown Act is a California law that guarantees the public's right to attend and participate in meetings of local legislative bodies. Planning group bylaws outline community group procedures. Indemnification ordinance protects community board members from legal liability when operating in accordance with city policies. Robert's Rules of Order serves as an additional resource for meeting conduct where other city policy is silent. There are 41 active planning groups in the city. Some groups include more than one community planning area, but under one planning group name with members from each community. The boundaries of a community planning area are defined at the community level, although we may acknowledge neighborhoods, especially when developing land use policies for neighborhoods that are distinct within a community. Land use issues or development projects that fall close to the boundary of adjacent planning areas are encouraged to receive input from the adjacent community. It is possible for the council by resolution to change the boundaries of a planning group. In considering a change, the council will take into account whether a community plan amendment or update is being processed and may change the community plan boundaries. Council Policy 600-24 requires that planning groups comply with the Ralph M. Brown Act, the state of California's open meetings law regarding noticing and conducting meetings to ensure that meetings are open to the public. Groups have the option to hold in-person, virtual, or hybrid meetings at their discretion, subject to the council policy, and at a minimum must provide notice to the public, indicate how a member of the public can join a meeting, and allow members of the public to address and interact during the meeting. Agendas must be posted at the physically accessible location of the meeting. Planning groups may forward agendas to the city planning department 7 calendar days in advance of the meeting for the department to post them on the city's website and distribute them through the constant contact distribution. However, this is done as a courtesy, as planning groups are required to meet the noticing requirements of the Brown Act. Planning groups are to conduct meetings that are open to the public, properly noticed, meaning 72 hours prior to meeting and must include time and location, and in compliance with the Brown Act provisions. Planning groups must adopt rules of procedure such as Robert's Rules of Order or Rosenberg's Rules of Order. Quorum is majority present of unvacant seats. Planning groups are encouraged to use publicly accessible websites and social media to post meeting agendas, minutes, reports, general information, and contact information provided in a manner that is consistent with the Brown Act. Planning groups must maintain all official records for a minimum of 5 years. Voting members should be representative of the entire community within that planning group's boundaries. There is a minimum to have 10 voting members and no more than 20 unless approved by City Council. Planning groups must develop election procedures to ensure equal participation by all members of the community, meaning anyone within the boundary of a planning group. Voting members' term limit is 8 consecutive years. Planning groups must establish operating procedures that include the requirements set forth in this policy and the terms and conditions, and must ensure that the public has notice of the operations and activities of the planning group. Community planning groups must adopt rules of procedure, such as Robert's Rules of Order or Rosenberg's Rules of Order, that may be used as a guide when Council Policy 600-24 and planning group operating procedures do not address an area of concern or interest. These rules of procedure provide a uniform means to facilitate public meetings, conduct public business, and resolve disputes. There are various rules of procedure that planning group can choose to utilize in running their meetings. Per Council Policy 600-24, the city encourages community planning groups to follow the Roberts Rules of Order procedures for setting times for agenda items to be considered and to adhere to a meeting schedule that has a standard start and end time for planning group meetings as a courtesy to planning group voting members, the public, applicants, and others who may be in attendance. However, there are other rules of order that a planning group can specify in their operating procedures. Robert's Rules of Order are commonly used for deliberation and debate. It provides procedures for offering motions, voting, debate, or discussion, and offering amendments to motions and ensuring that decisions that planning groups make are made with order, fairness, and transparency. Many of you may not notice, but your groups already use Robert's Rules of Order. Planning groups typically follow the basic rules of Robert's Rules of Order by deliberating on a single action or information item at a time on your meeting agenda, making motions to approve or deny a project with reason, recognizing a single individual to speak on an item at a time and given an opportunity for everyone to speak during public comment, and taking a vote where the majority vote stands as the planning group's position. Recognized planning groups must work with city staff throughout the community planning process, including during the formation of long-range community goals, objectives, and proposals or revisions for inclusion in a general or community plan. Attendees at recognized planning group meetings, as well as planning group voting members, must conduct themselves professionally and refrain from disrupting the public process as set forth on the agenda. Planning groups must routinely seek community participation in the planning and implementation process to serve the best long-range interest of the community at large. Currently, planning groups receive a $500 stipend every fiscal year to facilitate operations, but they can also develop a policy for financial contributions. Groups may not charge membership dues or a fee to attend meetings. Planning group members are required to attend trainings conducted by the city to maintain eligibility and indemnification from city against any legal action. Subcommittee members are also extended indemnification. Planning group operating procedures must include ethical, equitable, and inclusive standards for all planning group voting members and guards against planning group voting member conflicts of interest and undue influence. So what are planning groups responsible for? Planning groups are responsible for reviewing discretionary projects that require a development permit and providing advisory recommendations for land use matters such as general plan or community plan amendments. Project applicants are not required to come before planning groups for input or a recommendation. However, it is encouraged for applicants to attend. Planning groups should contact the applicant to make them aware when their project will be reviewed. Planning groups do not review ministerial projects, which are projects that do not require a development permit, such as a conditional use permit or site development permit. In other words, projects which do not require a decision maker to use discretion in approving a project. The city attorney's office does not advise planning groups. The assigned community planner can respond to any community plan or related questions and follow up with other departments or disciplines at the city. Community planners in the city planning department are assigned to each planning area within the city of San Diego. They review larger and more complex development projects that require a decision on consistency with the general plan and community plans, which are generally items heard by the Planning Commission and the City Council. They also prepare updates and amendments to the general plan and community plans, zoning and development regulations, and other city land use plans. Community planners support community planning groups and community members by serving as the single point of contact for planning group inquiries about land use or other related matters, and engage in productive, meaningful, and respectful communication with community members. Addressing questions and taking feedback concerning the general plan, community plans, and other city land use plans and policies from community members in their assigned communities, and reaching out to planning group chairs monthly to share updates and offer support. And although community planners may not attend all community meetings, chairs and planning group members can always reach out to planners outside of meetings via phone or email. Land use matters that are citywide or regional in scope are heard by the Community Planners Committee, otherwise known as CPC. Their roles and responsibilities are governed by Council Policy 600-9. These citywide matters usually involve City Council approval. As mentioned previously, projects heard by the city are citywide in nature, but can also involve several communities like the beach or coastal communities, or projects that implement the general plan, such as environmental justice or climate action initiatives. These projects will also undergo a review process with the CPC that typically involves informational presentations, such as a preview presentation given during staff reports or informational items discussed on the meeting agenda, the formation of a subcommittee for focused discussions on a project, ultimately leading to recommendations for the full CPC to consider, and an updated presentation that would include a draft plan or initiative addressing CPC or other stakeholder comments and input that would inform CPC recommendation. It should also be noted that not all projects would necessarily follow this process due to urgency of the matter or in cases of emergencies. Okay, so we're going to do what we did before with your smartphones. So if you could please pull your smartphones out or whatever devices you use to use the polling. And we're just going to answer a few questions. So the first question we have for you all is, the planning group has 15 seats, but 2 of those seats are vacant. How many members need to be in attendance in order to conduct business, or in other words, have a quorum? 8 members, 7 members, or all active members of the board. So you should be seeing those prompts on your smartphone popping up. Just take a look at the responses coming in. All right, so we have a ton of answers for 7 members. We have some folks saying 8 members. It's like most people are agreeing that it's either 8 or 7 members. We have a few for all active members of the board. A few more minutes. All right, so it looks like most people think it's 7 members. And if you did answer 7 members, you are correct. A quorum is defined as the presence of a majority of the filled seats of the planning group. Since there are only 13 filled seats, only 7 members are needed to have a quorum. If a quorum is not reached, then a group can set the next date for a meeting and adjourn the meeting. Okay, second question. True or false? A planning group must provide their agenda to the city 7 days in advance to comply with Brown Act noticing requirements. True or false? Okay, got a lot of false, some folks saying true. Majority seems like you're saying false. Alrighty. So if you said false, you are correct. The city posts and distributes planning group agendas as a courtesy to support planning groups to provide information of their meetings, but it's ultimately the responsibility of each recognized planning group to comply with the Brown Act noticing requirements by posting a notice or agenda at a physically accessible location 72 hours in advance of the meeting. The agenda should also be posted on a planning group's website if one is available, and provided to anyone who is requesting a copy of an agenda in order to be in accordance with the Brown Act. Next question. How are voting members and attendees expected to conduct themselves during meetings? Voting members may allow attendees to disrupt meetings over passionate issues, or attendees are expected to conduct themselves professionally and refrain from disrupting the public process. Voting members are expected to treat each other, members of the community, and city staff in a professional manner. You see those answers pop up on your screens. Most people answered B. Looks like everyone answered B, actually. So if you did answer B, you are correct. The goal of this requirement is to help planning groups operate in a manner that is professional, respectful, and engaging to all community members. A planning group may ask the board or members of the community to leave the meeting if their disruptive conduct inhibits the progress of the meeting. This applies to ad hoc and subcommittees as well. Right, question 4. Under what circumstances can a planning group hold a virtual meeting? Virtual meetings are enabled under a planning group's operating procedures. The public has the ability to access the meeting and participate in real time. Notice of the virtual meeting is provided, or all of the above. Okay, got 98% for all of the above. A couple of folks choosing A, some folks choosing B. Okay, so it looks like the majority of you chose all of the above, and you are correct. Per the recently adopted amendments to council policy, planning groups can hold virtual meetings, with planning group voting members no longer required to post their individual teleconference locations, as long as there is a provision in their operating procedures which must include providing notice of the virtual meeting and allowing the public to access and interact during the meeting. This also includes taking votes by roll call and requiring an in-person voting option during annual elections. Planning groups should carefully consider the unique needs of their community and the community planning group's capacity for reliable and robust technology in deciding whether to hold in-person meetings, hybrid meetings, or fully teleconferenced meetings. Now I will turn it over to my colleague Morgan.
Thanks, Angela. All right, so talking about scope of advisory recommendation. Planning groups make recommendations to the city on land use, infrastructure, parks, development projects in the community. And some specific examples of items that would go to a planning group for advisory recommendations would be the adoption of a new community plan, an amendment to a community plan or general plan, and discretionary permits or actions located within the community that comes before the board. This is not a requirement of the discretionary permit application process, but the city strongly encourages engagement with planning groups, community, and neighbors of the proposed project. Planning groups may also be called upon to advise in the identification of capital improvement and project infrastructure needs. So regarding deadlines, advisory recommendations on development projects that come to the board must be submitted within 7 calendar days of the planning group's recommendation. Recommendations are submitted by filling out a form provided by the Development Project Manager, or DPM, with the Development Services Department, or DSD, during the initial distribution process. The form needs to be turned into DSD either by emailing the DPM or via the online portal linked on the form. For projects with an EIR, or Environmental Impact Report, the planning group should submit comments before the public review period closes. For collective action, the official positions and opinions of the planning group must not be established or determined by any organization other than the planning group or any individual voting member of the board. Official positions and opinions of the planning group should be established or determined collectively. Planning group voting members who wish to make their own personal public comment at a public hearing or have a personal editorial published in a newspaper can certainly do so, and mention that they are members of a local planning group, but should not identify their opinions or comments as representing the planning group's official position. For the Brown Act compliance of social media can be used to promote awareness of a planning group activities and increase community participation. However, when outside of a noticed meeting, planning group members should refrain from engaging in discussions on projects and items that may come before the board for a vote. This includes social media discussions and posts. The golden rule for social media regarding projects and items is to just not engage. This also includes email communications that provide opinions on matters that can come before the planning board. Only factual information should be shared via email. So, recognized planning groups must not discriminate against any person or persons by reason of race, color, sex, gender, age, creed, national origin, ancestry, sexual orientation, marital status, military or veteran status, genetic information, medical condition, or physical or mental disability, or any other protected characteristic. Regarding rights and liabilities, city will indemnify and the city attorney will defend a community planning group or individual voting members acting in their advisory capacity to the city, so long as their conduct was in conformance with this policy and they are on record as having completed training. This includes subcommittee members who are not elected members of the planning group. Community planning groups are expected to ensure good faith, voluntary compliance with the Brown Act and proactively cure violations themselves to prevent legal actions that would void community planning group actions. Per Council Policy 600-24, Article 8, Section C, in the case of an alleged violation of Council Policy 600-24, a CPG's associated terms and conditions or operating procedures by a CPG voting member, the CPG must conduct an investigation consistent with this policy. If the CPG determines that a violation has occurred, the planning group's findings must be forwarded in writing to the city within 30 days of such finding for review by the mayor or designee. The city will work with the planning group to determine the validity of the complaint and to seek resolution. And B, a community planning group that violates this policy may forfeit its status as a recognized community planning group and lose its right to indemnification and defense by the city. If a community planning group is unable to meet quorum and attendance for 3 consecutive months, it may be placed in a temporary inactive status. Proposed changes shall be submitted to the mayor or their designee for review and approval. This can be initiated by forwarding a striked out or underlined version of your operating procedures to your community planner, who will work with Marlon, who's the mayor's designee, whereby any language to be removed or changed is struck out and the new proposed language is underlined. Any changes to a planning group's operating procedures must be consistent with Council Policy 600-24. If it is determined that the proposed amendments are not consistent with Council Policy 600-24, they will be considered before City Council for approval. Amendments are not valid until approved by the city. All right, and we have another round of questions, and I just want to reiterate that these are voluntary, not mandatory, and it sounds like there's some technical difficulty from the chat of people accessing the questions, so no worries, this is not a requirement. But for those who do have access and want to follow along, I'll go ahead and read off the next set of questions. So how long can the public comment on an agenda item go for? A, indefinitely. B, whatever time the chair decides at the beginning of the item that is appropriate. Or C, 3.14 minutes. I'll give folks a couple moments to answer. All right, looks like most people are choosing B, whatever time the chair decides at the beginning of meeting. And that is the correct answer. All meetings must allow for the public to comment on issues not on the agenda, as well as provide an opportunity for the public to comment on actual agenda items. Time limits may be placed by the chair when managing the meeting agenda and should be announced during the meeting before public comments have begun. Time limits are important for keeping your meetings on schedule. Next question. What step or steps needs to be taken in order to add an action item to the agenda during a meeting? A 2/3 vote is needed from the planning group. B, it must be determined by a vote that immediate action is needed on the item. C, the need for action on the item came to attention of the planning group after the agenda being posted. Or D, all of the above. Yeah, the questions coming in. Like a lot of people are choosing D, all of the above. For those of you who chose answer D, that is the correct answer. To add an action item to the agenda, all of these steps must be met in accordance with the Brown Act. Planning groups should not make a habit of adding action items to the agenda without proper noticing. However, there may be instances where a planning group would need to act immediately in response to a public hearing date or prevent missing a deadline to provide public input. Next question. Alleged violations related to Council Policy 600-24 are presented to the planning group. What should be the group's next course of action? A, have the planning group's chair refute all alleged violations. B, conduct an investigation consistent with Council Policy 600-24 and report their findings to city staff. Or C, request assistance from the city attorney's office for indemnification. All right, some split answers, but looks like most people are leaning towards answer B. So that is the correct answer. Per Council Policy 600-24, Article 8 in Section C, the case of an alleged violation of Council Policy, a community planning group's associated terms and conditions or operating procedures by a community planning group voting member, the planning group must conduct an investigation consistent with this policy. If the planning group determines that a violation has occurred, the planning group's findings must be forwarded in writing to the city within 30 days of such finding for review by the mayor or a designee, which is Marlon. The city will work with the planning group to determine the validity of the complaint and to seek resolution. All right, thank you very much. And I'll hand it back over to Marlon for questions.
All right, thank you, Angela and Morgan, for that overview of Council Policy 600-24. It's time for questions. I know we're running a little bit behind schedule, but I do want to take an opportunity to take a break here and go to the Q&A list here and just kind of pick a couple of questions that that you guys have been asking. Let's start with Chris Roseman. Okay, Chris has a question. Real question. When an action item or other agenda item is up for discussion, should public comment be taken first or planning group member comment first? Okay, so typically what happens is since the community is there to provide input that the planning group would take in to inform their decisions, you would usually want to have the public provide their comment first. And then the chair would close the public comment and then keep the next round of comments for the planning group to have that discussion. So then public comment would be closed, you wouldn't be hearing any more from the public, and then it would be just left to the planning group members to discuss the item, and then you'd make a recommendation. Okay, good question. Ooh, keeps bouncing around. From Bettina Rauza, is it possible to participate in the polls and questions on the link, which is the only way I can tonight? Oh, sorry about that. We kind of passed that up. We kind of already completed that. When we make a copy of this video, we were going to also accompany it with the copy of the presentation. So you can kind of see, well, you will be able to see the questions that were asked and of course the answers. So we'll have that for you. I'm sorry that you weren't able to participate. Lynn Elliott, hi Lynn from North Park. This is the 620 form does not work well online. Best to make a copy of the online form and then send. Yeah, you can certainly do that. We'll look into the link on the form, whether that's functioning or not. We do have Pancho Mendoza here from DSD. We can definitely forward that to him so he can kind of look into that, but thanks for bringing that to our attention. Malachi Bilecki, point of clarification, to comply with the Brown Act, individual members of a community planning group should refrain from engaging in discussions and or expressing an opinion on items that may come before the CPG for a vote. Yes, that is correct. So for instance, most planning groups will have a time on their agenda called non-agenda public comment. And someone may bring up something that's not on their agenda and talk about some other future project or whatnot. It wouldn't be advisable for the planning group to start having an interaction or discussion on that item, especially if it potentially can come before the planning group as an action item. So of course, it hasn't been noticed, so it wouldn't be proper for the planning group to talk about that without a noticed hearing or noticed agenda. So yes, that's important. They would have to refrain. Let's see. Another question from Glenn Rasmussen. Hey, Glenn. Most attendees do not carry cash by which an anonymous donation may be made at a meeting. Can we use a device, donations visible only by the treasurer, to accept donations? Okay, well, we don't have any specific direction on how the planning group does accept donations. You can do that again to support the operations of the group. So you may want to specify something in your operating procedures so it's a lot more clear and transparent to the public when they do participate and provide donations in that fashion. So yeah, you can certainly do that. And you can totally specify operating procedure, those provisions in your operating procedures. Here's a question from Edwin Lohr. Let me just check the time here. 6:15. Okay. All right. I'm gonna have this as the last question for this session, and then we'll take a break for about 5 minutes and then come back with the presentation from DSD. So Edwin Lohr has a question. Is it against 624 to have a gathering of the local planning group in a social atmosphere? Edwin, City Heights Area Planning Committee. Okay. Hey, Edwin. That's a good question. So it has to do with a quorum. So is there a quorum during that social atmosphere? Because if there is a quorum of planning group members, and it depends on the context, of course, because are they there just for a party and everyone's just eating and drinking and just talking, or are they there for some other specific function that could be the subject of discussion at a planning group meeting? So it's one thing if you don't have a quorum of members there, but if there is a quorum, that would constitute an official meeting of the planning group. So you may want to discuss among yourselves about, if anyone's planning to be at the same location all at once. Perhaps maybe some people could just allow others to attend without them having to attend. But again, try to avoid those situations. I don't think it happens a lot in terms of people attending social functions and having that issue. I know that certain project meetings, a chair will probably ask if any of the members are planning to attend that meeting, and kind of get a tally at that time before any of the members actually attend the function. So it's one thing to kind of keep in mind, but I don't anticipate it happens all the time, especially with project meetings or anything like that. Okay, let's take a break right now. It's about 6:18. Let's come back at about, let's say 6:23, and maybe it might flex until about 6:25. But let's come back at about 6:23, take a break right now, stretch out, get something to drink, and we'll come back in about 5 minutes. All right, everybody, I hope you had a chance to take a quick break. Apologize for running a little bit behind schedule, but I think we can still cover everything that we need to talk about tonight. So let's talk about the next section of our training, which deals with the development review process, discretionary permits, and open DSD. Pancho is going to be providing a presentation on that. And then we'll be talking about a California Environmental Quality Act, get a short overview of how that relates to planning groups, and I'll be giving that presentation tonight. And then we'll have Q&A after that, and then conclude tonight's training. Okay, so right now I'd like to introduce Francisco Pancho Mendoza, Development Project from the Development Services Department, who will be giving a presentation on development project. So Pancho, take it away.
Hey guys, I'm Francisco Mendoza, but I also go by Pancho. Can you guys hear me? I am a project manager in development services, and I take a multitude of projects to decision makers, either be it a city council approval or planning commission approval or hearing officer, or sometimes as the decision maker myself. Before we get too far into it, here are some links that are available for you guys to look at, especially after we follow up on the after you can download the presentation. A lot of the information where sort of our wheelhouse is within the municipal code and within the zoning maps of the city. I believe it's called ZAP now. The bottommost link gives you sort of the overview of sort of the role of the project manager and the sort of the layout of all discretionary projects in the city. Another available link is the OpenDSD Citizen Access Portal. If you can go to the next slide, Marlon, thank you. You can search for applications. So when someone makes an application at the city, we send out a notice of application or either a notice of future decision. And you'll have either my name or the assigned project manager. And you will have the project number and the address and the general scope of what the initial proposal is on that one. You can also go on to the Citizen Access portal and look up that project and get more information regarding that project as well. Let's see. The ZAP program is also where a multitude of reviewers will be looking at a project. And on the ZAP portal, we look at all the overlays and all the sort of regulatory rules that would impact a project. Sometimes those overlays trigger a higher discretionary approval. You've heard a conditional use permit and coastal development permit, but we also have plan development permits. You've also heard land use plan amendments and stuff like that. Next slide, actually 2 slides down. There are 2 types of permits in the city of San Diego, and that's ministerial and discretionary. Ministerial are what we call by right. So they can be simple projects like a water heater replacement, electrical plumbing permits. They are also sometimes what the discretionary permit will require a project to have issued. So, for example, grading permits are sometimes triggered as part of a discretionary approval. Not every house requires a discretionary permit. It is dependent on the zone that they're in, the land use plan and its designation, and other regulations. Ministerial permits are also not subject to appeal. and they do not have a component that would require or even include public participation. Discretionary projects are what a project manager like myself would work with, and our role is not to be an advocate for the project. Our role is to make sure that it doesn't get lost in all the bureaucracy of all the different reviewers that have to review a project. And so what we aim to do is get them to a decision point as soon as possible. Or if there are other discretionary actions required with what they're proposing, we determine what the course of action should be to get to a decision maker. One of the biggest issues that crop up is an easement that the applicants were not aware of on the premises. They would have to modify their project or request a vacation of that easement if it's not being used. And so that could trigger a process 2 easement vacation, depending on whether there are existing utilities in there or if it's a utility easement, or it could be brought up to a process 5 decision. And so all that complexity when reviewing those plans is what we are tasked to do to make sure that these projects get to the finish line. Next slide, please. So to sort of spell out in a list, process 1s are ministerial approvals, and they have to meet the regulations. There's no discretion on process 1s. There's no public notice, and they adhere to all the requirements that are outlined in the municipal code. Process 2 through 5 are all discretionary, require public notice. We almost always highly recommend they go to the community planning group to get their input. Process 2s are, and these are all sort of spelled out in the municipal code, like which projects trigger a process 2, which ones trigger a process 3 or a 4. And the decision maker for a process 2 would be myself, the project manager, but that's sort of a misnomer. It's with every staff person in agreement that's reviewing those projects that we all basically say this meets the the regulations and we can approve it as such. And so I as the decision maker am the person signing the coastal permit, and the owner and the permittee also sign a permit that usually is a part of a discretionary process. When the note, and those are the process 2s are usually sent out with a notice of future decision. And so that's when the public that gets noticed at that point would need to write to the development project manager to let them know that they want to receive the notice of decision. So that's really an important step that you as the public need to be aware of. Okay. Typically, the more complex the project is, the higher the decision process. So if someone wants to do like an alcohol outlet, which is in the municipal code says requires a process 3 CUP, that's a hearing officer decision. If someone wants to change put in a helipad on top of a hospital, that's a process 5 decision. So it definitely is controlled by the complexity of the project. In some cases, the more complex projects are either planning commission or city council, and those usually are for the city council one, those usually are a 2-step process where the planning commission makes the recommendation and the city council makes the final decision. That's the general outline of what we do as the project manager. I think in our day-to-day, the most complex thing is to assure that all the staff people, all the staff disciplines that are reviewing a project are included. And a lot of times, sometimes the projects get a little squirrely, but we always recommend that they always reach out to the community group and get their recommendation. There have been a couple in my history here at DST that have foregone going to the community planning group, but we highly recommend against that. Next slide. One more. So for each discretionary project, when they first come in, you will get an email from noreply@sandiego.gov's Gmail email account. We do the first major review, and we send out an assessment letter. Sometimes what we've noticed here is that the recommendation waits for the assessment letter to see if there's any major issues before allowing a project into the sort of the planning groups that are committees or moving it through. And I think some of the most important things that I've noticed is that when a community group takes a proactive role and starts adding their discussion to the project early on, it's more likely that those requests will be heard. Let's see. Yeah, and so when the project is ready to be taken to a decision maker, the planning group and also anyone who's requested notice will get a notice of public hearing. You're not required to be at the public hearing, but there have been many situations where the planning group is one of the either in support of the project or in against the project, and so they are the ones that are there to make sort of a presentation for or against the project. And that there's also the opportunity, once you're heard at the public hearing, to also appeal it, and those procedures are published and are available online. And then the final slide, Marlon. So there's a bunch of additional resources you guys can utilize, and they're all on the Development Services website. And agendas, reports, even for example, the items that you are for or against, you can write to the hearing bodies ahead of time, and that information will be published as well. So that concludes my shortened presentation. Do you guys have any questions?
Yeah, thanks for that, Pancho. We've got a number of questions in the chat. I'll go ahead and read a question here from Saul Amberling. If a completed ministerial approved project appears to have violated codes, what is the recourse for the community?
So you would want to, I mean, if they have done violations, that's a miss from either the inspection staff, but you would call our building land use enforcement, Blue, and file a complaint through there. And it might not be as fast as you would like, but that would be the way to handle it. Currently, I work with code enforcement, which is the old acronym for Blue. And I've had quite a few projects where, as a result of community input and community calling out sort of the transgressions, that they are forced to get a discretionary permit to correct the issues.
We got another question.
Does
here.
that answer your question? Okay.
Oh, well, we're just taking the questions and providing the responses. Here's a question from
Okay.
Eric Law. If a project chooses to not go to a community planning group for a coastal permit, would the project manager notify the community planning group that such a project was in the works?
Yeah, I mean, you would get a notice of application. Some coastal permits require a process 3, and those are the ones, they're usually the ones that are more closer to the ocean or usually beachfront. There are other specific situations where they're inland and require the coastal commission's concurrent approval. We wouldn't notify you unless you requested, as a person, we wouldn't notify you, but we always send the notice of decision to the community planning group.
We have another question.
You would also receive it. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, we have another question from Vicky Touchstone here. How do you get on a list for receiving process 2 notices of future decision, particularly for city proposed projects such as CIP projects?
There is a website I think it's on the Development Services Department's website, and it's the city bulletin. So all notices of future decisions, all notices of applications get posted there. By law, we're only required to mail the notice of future decision and the notice of application to within folks within a 300-foot radius of the project's boundaries. However, I know that you can get on the City of San Diego's mailing list, and you will be notified not only of agendas for the community groups, that if you want to sign up for the specific community groups, you will get their agendas, but you will also get notices of application for coastal permits, notices of future decisions for projects and specific community plans. So if you're looking for a notice of future decision for coastal permits, you can sign up for all coastal applications on that website.
Let's take one more, and then we'll cover
Okay.
the last portion of our training. And Pancho, I know you're going to stick around, and we can, at the end of the next presentation, we can go back and answer some DSD related questions too as well. So the last question here is from Kevin Sullivan. When the ZAP tool shows a parcel belonging to the city and the county shows the parcel belonging to private party, what is the process for verifying the correct information?
That's an interesting question. So usually we it's not as simple as just saying, oh, the ZAP tool shows this, but we do utilize some county resources to figure out whether or not that parcel is in fact on the city's there's a lot of sleuthing that goes on that usually either planning, the LDR planning reviewer does to determine not just who owns it, but if it really is in question, like who actually owns it, we do have land surveyors that look at it. But generally speaking, if the applicants that when they propose like a discretionary application, they will have the grant deed and it will show the ownership on that grant deed. So that's kind of the way. I mean, you are opening a bigger question that I do have a lot of experience in. So I'm trying to keep it as simple as I can, and it's not quite so simple.
Great.
At least not from the ZAP tool perspective. So there are parcels that are, for example, county owned, but the military is using it, and so it can be complex, but it usually takes a lot of different tools to sort of analyze the project from the outside, meaning from ZAP and other things. The city staff have a little bit more resources to sort of figure out more information in that regard.
Well, thanks, Pancho. In the interest of everyone, out of respect for people's time, we're going to move on, and we're still going to have an opportunity at the end of the next presentation to go over some of these questions that Pancho could help us answer. So thanks a lot, Pancho. All right, so
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks. The last portion of our training is on CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, and this is a short overview as it relates to community planning groups. As most of you all know, this is a law that's been in effect since 1970. So all discretionary decisions of the city are subject to environmental review under CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. The basic purposes of CEQA are to inform government decision makers and the public about the potential significant environmental effect of proposed activities, identify the ways that environmental damage can be avoided or significantly reduced, prevent significant avoidable damage to the environment by requiring changes in projects through the use of alternatives or mitigation measures when the governmental agency finds the changes to be feasible, and disclose to the public the reasons why a governmental agency approved a project in the manner the agency chose if significant environmental effects are involved. CEQA establishes a duty for public agencies to avoid or minimize environmental damage where feasible. A public agency should not approve a project as proposed if there are feasible alternatives or mitigation measures available that would substantially lessen any significant effects that the project would have on the environment. Environmental documents like the environmental impact reports or EIRs and negative declarations have a public review period. Community planning groups can prepare written comments during this period for which the city must consider and prepare a response. Comments on the environmental document should speak to the adequacy of the environmental document. Only environmental issues should be included in a comment letter to the city on an environmental document. If your comment is on a project or a plan itself, it is best to provide those comments to the development project manager or community planner. Per CEQA, city environmental staff in the city planning department, development services department, or other city departments are only required to respond to comments raising significant environmental issues that are received during the noticed comment period. For this slide and the next, I will be using an EIR for a community plan update as my example environmental review document. An EIR for a CPU or community plan update is an environmental analysis that considers environmental impacts pursuant to CEQA and assesses the potential environmental impacts of the implementing plan. A community plan update EIR is not a planning document or regulatory requirement. The EIR does not provide policy guidance or regulations for a community. An EIR also does not consider impacts outside of those required by CEQA. An EIR identifies mitigation measures and alternatives to reduce or avoid any potential significant impacts. A community plan update EIR is not an implementation plan for the community plan update or any other kind of plan. Again, this slide and the last used a community plan update EIR as an example, but this is true of any environmental document that your planning group may comment on. If your comment is on the plan or project itself, it is best to send those comments or recommendations to the project manager for that plan or project. Comments on an environmental document should address the adequacy of the environmental analysis. This link provides the information about the environmental process, and we can take questions. However, I'm not the subject matter expert on CEQA. If we do have some questions regarding CEQA-specific items, we can definitely contact Rebecca Malone, who's in the City Planning Department, who manages the environmental policy section in our department. So that concludes a really quick, brief overview on CEQA. And so let's bring it over to questions, and let's return back to our Q&A. Can I have Mr. Mendoza's email and number again? Sure, we can certainly provide that. Are EIRs made public? Yes, they are. And that's from Annie Kafka. Brian Schwab, has the city planning department been significantly impacted by the proposed budget cuts? I wouldn't say significantly impacted. Obviously, we don't have the ability to hire any new staff to kind of help us work with the many initiatives that we are working on. But for the most part, it seems like everybody's still here. Thanks for asking, Brian. Let's see. Andrew Hollingworth, if a planning group sees problems with the EIS, it's environmental impact statement, so that's on a national or federal level, should they protest to DSD? Again, so that's regarding a federal project. If DSD is somehow involved or kind of facilitating that review, sure, you can certainly send your comments to DSD, but there usually would be a contact on the federal level regarding an EIS. And now if it was an EIR, yeah, that would be the City of San Diego. That's an environmental impact report, and the EIS deals with federal funded projects. Okay, so that was from Jace, who was that from? Oh, okay, well, let's see, let's get to the next one. This might be a question for Pancho from Jason Stahl. Is there an expiration to permits if projects do not begin in a timely manner or delay for years?
So there are codified requirements for a project that has a discretionary permit. They have 36 months to begin substantial work. We call that utilization of a development permit. They can apply for another discretionary application called an extension of time. And that's a process too. And what we look for is to see if the regulations have changed in those 36 months to require any other conditions that may require changes to the project. I know that there are state laws that would influence whether a development can be prolonged even further. But generally speaking, a lot of these projects tend to get started either really soon, or usually it's a market condition that causes them to either lose the discretionary permit, or there is some ability to file certain parts of the discretionary permit to get it vested, and that just only gives them, upwards of a couple more months to get the permit issued and construction started. Every application, ministerial, like for example, grading permits and ministerial building permits, those have, depending on the construction type, 1 year or 2 years to get the application done. And so there's a lot of these issues have cropped up over the years, but generally speaking, most projects have to get started with construction at the very latest 3 to 5 years. So that's the answer on that one.
I got another question for you, Pancho, from David Modi over from Kentau. Could you explain the role of tentative map permits in greater detail?
Absolutely. So when you're proposing to subdivide, let's say you've got a 10,000 square foot lot, you submit for a tentative map to subdivide it, which is to say you want to create and draw 2 5,000 square foot lots, and you want to at a later time split them and sell them separately. And that's usually the case. Now, from a discretionary standpoint, the state law requires a geotechnical report, requires CEQA analysis, and all those things. Now, the state law is currently changing, where now they can propose a tentative map exemption, but the requirements for that are so stringent that most projects have to do a discretionary tentative map. And depending on how many smaller lots they want to create, it could either be a process 3 or a process 4. And so the one thing about tentative maps that I find interesting is that I forgot where I was going to go with that. But what I'm saying is they generally have that's what I was thinking, is that they must adhere to the community plan lot sizes and dimensions. And so if the community plan wants RS-17s to have 50 foot of frontage, that's a requirement of the tentative map. So we look at the community plan, land use plan to see, and we look at the municipal code to see what types of lots they're proposing, and whether they follow those regulations. Now they can then request deviations to those requirements, and so then that starts to add more and more discretionary approvals to it. usually increasing the decision process level to a 4. Did that answer your question?
Well, we're just providing the responses. Yeah, they wouldn't be responding back. So
Oh, I see.
everybody
Okay.
an opportunity to get their question answered. So I got another
Right.
one for you, Pancho, from Richard Earth. My impression is the time to approve a project is very lengthy. That is to say, measured in years. Do you track approval times?
We do track approval times, and that's one of the constant things that we are working on. And in many cases, the noticing, the sort of the managing multi-disciplines, the additional discoveries of during the development review process is it's basically a back and forth where we want to assure, like if we look at a simple project, we want to assure that we're not impacting intersections, we're not and by impact I mean the at some point there will be an increase to either the delay that you're at an intersection, and so we're looking at it holistically to see that the development isn't impacting further and further away. Currently, I have a couple of projects that are really large and something like 2,000 dwelling units, and so it has been difficult to sort of figure out just the types of conditions that we require to sort of allow that development in that area without impacting, the existing infrastructure, the existing, public right of way, and all while falling under what's generally allowable with the overlays and the regulatory requirements in that specific spot.
Thanks, Pacho.
Mhm.
The amount of time we have left in the training, I kind of want to go back and look at some of the planning group operational questions that are on here to get an opportunity for those to be answered. So looking back here, we got a question from Stuart Gross. If a planning group chair invites all the members to a social gathering at his or her home, is that a violation of the Brown Act and classified as a planning group meeting? It's possible we have to kind of look at some other details, but of course, a gathering that equates to a quorum of planning group members in one location could be considered a meeting. We may want to also look into the context of that meeting. If it's just a social gathering, like I mentioned, where people are just eating, they're not talking about planning group things, they're probably talking about a football game or what they watched on TV, that might be fine. But the moment we start talking about projects or issues that come before a planning group, then that's where we would that could be scrutinized or challenged in terms of having a unnoticed meeting. So there's a lot of details and context or case by case kind of evaluations that need to be done when something like that happens. So we may want to ask questions about before we go, are we just going to be, just having a good time, just eating and drinking, or are we actually talking about planning group business? So of course we wouldn't want to do the latter. Thanks for that question, Stu. Got a question from Chris Roseman. Is there some training on how community planning groups can most effectively engage in the CIP process? How it works, what type of projects to request, how to request them, etc. CIP is Capital Improvement Program, and that's all the projects that are basically our capital projects like roads, libraries, all the infrastructure type projects, sidewalks, those are CIP type projects. So every year there is a CIP prioritization process that our department processes with the public. And we typically, since CIPs are citywide, we go out to the Community Planners Committee, which handles items that are of citywide nature like CIP, and we do a presentation and talk about that process and how people can get involved. And one of the main things we do ask of all the members, and for those members at CPC to relate to their respective planning groups, is to identify potential projects or capital projects in their community. So this year, actually last year, I think it was last summer, I believe our assistant deputy director came out and talked about their prioritization process and then provided a spreadsheet for all the community planning group members to provide their their projects, these proposed projects, anything in their community they thought would be good capital projects to be funded. Of course, not everything gets funded, but we want to hear from you in terms of what these priorities could be. And so that spreadsheet would include what the project is, where it would be located, and other details. And we would say, provide that project to us by a certain date so we can kind of compile that, work with other departments in the city. So that process is going to happen again around the summer, I believe, and be on the lookout for the CPC agenda when that happens, and there should be more information on that during that time. We got a question from Lauren Powell. And is it compliant to hold a training with board members, less than a quorum, for example, to review the local PDO and project review process for new board members, as long as there is no discussion of projects that could be agenda items? I think I know what you're asking here. So can several planning group members, less than a quorum, get together to kind of review the municipal code or a planned district ordinance or a project? The first two things, not a problem. I mean, it's not a quorum. When we're looking at a project, we want to make sure that we don't develop a collective concurrence where we're talking about a project and next thing you know, one of those three people go out and talk to other members on the group and it's less than a quorum and start talking about a project, and all of a sudden we're having this collective discussion outside of a publicly noticed meeting. So it's okay to educate yourselves on the regulatory documents that apply to your community or in the city, or just understanding the processes that you guys would be involved with in terms of being a planning group member. But for specific projects, if you're looking at those, it's best to review those in a public setting at a noticed meeting at a planning group. Let's see here. Oh, here's a question I asked from Kyle Walker. I asked this earlier, but I think it disappeared and didn't get answered. Does the city's indemnity cover the planning group's named participation in community events organized by other community organizations? If we're supposed to do outreach, how can we be sure that we're not liable for anything that happens? My reading is that only covers the CPG meetings and subcommittee meetings. Okay, so we could probably look at this a little bit closer. One of the conditions for indemnification is if it's about a planning group as a whole, or specific members, were they operating under the council policy and consistent with the council policy or the operating procedures? And if they're doing that, then that's fine. So yeah, that would be meeting that condition. So for instance, if you were going out to a town council and presenting something and someone didn't like what you said and they got offended and they, try to pull a lawsuit on you, you would be there under the auspices of the planning group, which probably most likely voted as an action item to send you there to share information. So you would be operating under, the planning group's compliance with Council Policy 600-24 and your operating procedures. So yeah, you would be covered in that sense. I mean, that example I provided is pretty extreme. I mean, you'd have to be talking about something really egregious for someone to like just notice you and then really have a bone to pick with you. But usually, if in instances where a legal issue happens, usually it's at a notice planning group, and usually not anywhere else outside yet that we know of. So who knows? There could be some new cases to look into and add to the information that we currently know about indemnification. Okay, let's see. Kevin Sullivan asked the question, how do community planning groups get a list of DIF, development impact fees, collected from projects in their jurisdictions under the newly citywide DIF without having to do a PRA to get citywide data? Oh, okay. Well, I was just looking at this with one of our staff persons. In this presentation, when we convert it and save it to the webpage, there are some links for pieces of information or resources that planning groups typically ask about, like, how do I look up zoning? So there'll be a link to the municipal code. Who's the first point of contact at the city? We have a link to the community planning group contact list that shows like your chair, the meeting times for the meeting, and your assigned community planning group member. Your assigned community planner. And also there's a link in there that connects to the impact fee summaries for each community. So it shows all the fees that were applied to a community. It also shows projects that the fees are funding, and a balance and like a total in terms of like diff fees in your community. So that's in this PowerPoint presentation. And when we save it onto the web, it'll be converted to a PDF with active links. So you can definitely click on that link and it'll take you to a web page that shows all the communities. You click on those links and you'll get a financial fiscal impact fee summary of your community. Let's see. Okay, here's another question from David Swearens. Hey, David, from Greater Golden Hill. The historic practice of in-person trainings was preferable for many reasons, including no tech requirements and no glitches, but mostly for the interaction integral to getting together. This came up earlier this week at CPC, and I strongly concur with that suggestion. Thank you for that comment. David, I have been with the planning department for a very long time, and I do remember providing those trainings, still doing it, when they were in person. We would meet in a big meeting room in Kearney Mesa and spend about 4 hours with planning group members going over council policy, having breakout sessions about development review, historic preservation, at the time it was called neighborhood code compliance, the general plan. We had a lot of things. So obviously budget and capacity is where it is. And so we're trying to do the most with what we have, try to make things a little bit more efficient. But some things are good, some things are bad. There's a lot of good and bad with a lot of things. Doing this thing electronically is something that we are pursuing because we have the ability to reach a broad range of people who may not be able to come to a meeting. But it's not to say that we could probably have in-person meetings sometime in the future. I think there's still a lot of merit, like a lot of folks said at CPC, of being able to shake someone's hand, look them in the eye, or I think as David Modi from Kental said, to pigeonhole presenters or even staff people at the end of the meeting to talk to them about certain issues. So thank you for that, David. Okay. So I'm going to end with that. It's about 7:05. Again, I want to be respectful of everybody's time. We did say this is a 2-hour training and we wanted to keep it that. I know we're 5 minutes over. So in conclusion, I would like to thank everybody who took the time to attend our training. I'd also like to thank our presenters, Angela, Morgan, and Pancho, and also our deputy director for providing some remarks and participating in the training. And just to let you know, everybody who's in attendance, we're recording this again, so you will get credit in the case that somehow there is a discrepancy and you attended this training, but somehow you didn't, what's it called? Was it recorded? Just feel free to reach out to me or your chair and they'll get in touch with us and we could definitely look into it more. There's other ways to determine who has taken the training aside from what Zoom has offered us. So there's ways to figure that out. Again, if any of your fellow planning group members who have not attended, who weren't able to attend this training, we will offer an alternative online training that they can take on their own time. That will be posted soon on the Community Planning Group Resources webpage. And with that, I want to again thank everybody and tell you guys good night and thank you. Bye-bye.